Florian, you said a great deal about the Swiss model, but in your view, how great does it work? Is it a system that you would advocate personally? Do you want to go forward with increasing the level of direct democracy, or do you think there are some problems that have to be addressed?
I would not advocate for any other country to take over the Swiss model. What works in Switzerland works in Switzerland. But it's true that what we are doing now is to also analyze how can we actually limit direct democracy. Direct democracy that goes against human rights, basic human rights, will most probably in Switzerland in the future not be accepted anymore. We will have a referendum in the next 2-3 years on accepting that actually it is limited to public policies and that fundamental rights that are agreed upon cannot be countered by even a direct democracy initiative. But what is interesting is, when we talk about direct democracy, we don't mean the part of referendums that are used by government or parliament to consult, or even to, when the government doesn't want, or parliament doesn't want to take a decision, it tells, well, people, please do it. We're actually talking about when the people have the initiative. And that is quite interesting to revitalize our societies. I mean, in Switzerland, there would be 200 people at a breakfast to talk about democracy, so I'm quite impressed here right now. But the idea of direct democracy is not that government decides when it consults people or when not, on which issues or not, at least in Switzerland. The idea is that citizens, a group of political parties, civil society can have ideas that maybe parliament does not have.
Carl Hagen, you mentioned that you were in favor of a referendum on whether or not Oslo were to have the Olympic Games. But if you have that kind of referendum, you don't ask the people what it should vote, how it should prioritize other matters. So do you see that sometimes a referendum can be too complex, or what should the voters who go to vote in about the Oslo Olympics prioritize down? You don't ask that question.
No, that's right, because you have to ask a simple question. And in this case, it's going, I think we haven't decided yet, but I think it's going to be, should Oslo send the application to arrange the Olympic Games in 2022, yes or no? And I think a lot of questions can be simple. The debate will be simple, because there will be a debate where you have the various sites for the various, whether it's slalom or whether it's long run or whatever. But I have the basic view that people are a lot more responsible, interested than other people. You said that there are right or wrong morals. To me, there are not. I might have my views on various moral questions, and you have your views, but I would never say that my views are the right ones and your views are the wrong ones. This attitude that people are stupid, that they are only thinking about themselves and they're not thinking about the long-term consequences, I don't agree. I have a positive view of people in general. I mean, because I've been a member of parliament for 30 years doesn't make me any better or more informed or something than every other people. I would say that if you have a referendum, you will have a debate for or against the question, and people who are interested in those things, they will follow. And you will have a lot more decisions made by people who know about the arguments in favor or against than Parliament normally will have. Because those who are voting, as our friend from Switzerland said, those who are voting are the people who are interested in that issue, whether they are against or in favor. And I mean, the representative democracy which we have, as my friend here, 20 years ago, gay marriages or partnerships didn't exist. And we've had a representative democracy since 1814. So every country develops, it changes, and what's morally right today, and everybody almost means it, was wrong 50 years ago. So you can't have the absolute, that is right and that is wrong, if you have respect for people and democracy is in fact having respect for people. But my final question here is, the Progress Party's program is printed, I think, in 20,000 booklets. And we've had about 300,000 people voting for us, so there can't be everybody who's read the program and know exactly what they're voting for. And I think it's exactly the same with the other parties. So when people vote for a party, they vote for not knowing what the party means in thousands of issues. That's why direct democracy is much better.
Morten, you seem to be representing the elitist point of view here. What is the problem of holding a referendum if whether or not Oslo should have the Olympic Games?
Yes, I represent the elitist conception here, and I'm pretty proud of it, and I think that everybody else is to a large extent representing an elitist conception as well, because I believe that there are morally right, morally wrong answers to certain key issues. I think that the people in Germany were inherently wrong when they elected Adolf Hitler, and I think they made some inherently wrong moral decisions regardless of the animosity that these decisions were made on. I think that, for example, the people in the United States made inherently wrong, morally wrong decisions when they allowed slavery for a long time. I think those issues, and I think that, for example, we made wrong moral decisions when we did not allow women to vote until 1913. I think you were even worse morally wrong than that, even if that took a popular democracy to bring about. Because since I'm not a moral relativist on those issues, I acknowledge that people disagree rationally on a lot of issues, economic issues and all that, and a lot of moral issues as well, that there might be different answers that are equally good. But I think that nevertheless there are, that if you bring issues to the people that are going to be decided by the people on very many occasions, you are going to end up either with too many rights, that people give themselves rights that are not financially that they cannot function at all of them at the same time, or they give or revoke too few rights.
Before I bring Rasmus Hansson into the debate, a short follow-up to Carl I. Hagen. Where do you draw the principle line of what kind of question you would not like to see being part of a referendum, or what questions do you not ask the people?
Basically the same as has been mentioned: human rights, freedom of speech, and I would not have a referendum where the majority can do wrong things with the minority, in other words, protecting minority rights. Obviously there are a number of things that you can't do that, because a majority can't take away the human rights of the minorities. So issues like that would be that. So it's a number of issues where you can't. And I'm not saying that every issue should be put to referendum. I think I mentioned 10 questions every other year when we have elections anyway. That House makes decisions every day. So it's a very limited number of referendums I would like, but I would like some more than no referendums apart from the European Union.
Rasmus Hansson, you mentioned that this is kind of dilemma of what kind of question you should ask and what kind of questions you can't ask. Do you care to elaborate? If you take Lofoten as an example, how would you design a referendum on Lofoten if you were to design? We all know that the way you frame a question has a lot to say about how people answer.
Well, that's a tough one, but what I would at least do is that I would include the long-term implications of the decision, because I think that Lofoten, to use that example, is a good one in the sense that it's a very, on the face of it, it's a very acute and localized and defined issues. It's yes or no actually to impact assessment, but the more important part of it is the long-term implications of that type of decision. So I think the point here is simply that responsibility needs to be a very, very important part of the decision as to whether to have a referendum or not, because the long-term responsibility of the results need to be considered extremely much. That's an important part of any politics, but it's very much part of that kind of abrupt and final decision of an issue.
I noticed 4 people wanting to come to the floor, but I will give Carl Hagen a 30 seconds before I go to the first one.
I'd like to answer your question. The question you can put on Lofoten is: bør arbeidet med en konsekvensutredning for Lofoten og Vesterålen igangsettes? The debate, of course, will, as Rasmus Hansen says, be a lot more in the public, in the public debate. But the question is a simple question. It's questions like that Parliament is voting yes or no to every day. It's not difficult at all to form a question, and the answer is very easy, yes or no. But the debate will contain a lot more of arguments and perspectives.
What do you say to that, Rasmus Hansson? That was a simple question, yes or no?
Yes, and it's too simple, which is part of the problem with the Lofoten issues, because it's obviously a problem where it's very easy to isolate the question into something which is supposedly just about saying yes or no to drilling in one place, and the reality is it isn't. And if that is not ensured as a basic part of the decision making, then you might you might open up for something which, to use your words, Morten, was that the name? The wrong answer.
First one from the floor is the gentleman in front here, and then I have noticed a person back there, and one sitting there, and also a lady sitting right behind there. So, please.
To Kinander, as you said, you're an elitist, and that this is where kind of the question comes down. You have contempt for the populace, that they should only be limited to be allowed to vote every 4 years, and then they should give power to people, and then they become intelligent when they sit in Parliament. I mean, there is a reason why voter participation is on the way down. It's not rising in Norway and the Western world. Why is that, do you think? And why is the populist contempt for the people who sit in there increasing? Is that because they're smart, because they're spineless and make poor solutions to easy questions?
Yes, Morten, direct question to you.
Thank you. I have no contempt of the people, and if I have, and if I am delusioned with some of the alternatives you mentioned, I think they're the people who are sitting over there. And I agree with all the, as I said in the beginning, I agree that the distance between the electorate and the elected has increased and it's becoming too wide. I'm not saying either that the people should not be able to vote directly on a lot of issues. I can agree that people can vote whether or not to have local rules of one sort or another. But on the big, difficult issues, I believe that civil society should debate and that they should choose their representatives to have that debate on their behalves.
Before I let Florian get the floor, the gentleman wanted to follow up, but be short.
And the next part is, you mentioned Hitler came to Germany into power. He didn't get a very high popular vote, it was in the 30s. We have a party called Debatt Flere. They have about the same amount of power. They're a select group of people taken in from Eller. So it's a very select group of people who have taken power, and they now dominate with a very poor representation in the populace, but they still dominate the country. Isn't that also a problem?
Well, Morten, do you like to defend Eller and Arbeiderpartiet?
No. And I say, sure, it's a problem, but if you think that a different system is going to solve that problem, you are going to be very, very disappointed, because they will probably give you just the same or other answers, and you might not like those answers. And what are you going to do then?
Florian?
Yeah, just a very brief follow-up. It has been said before that people might not be able to choose on these big economic issues, and look at Greece and Ireland. Let's just remember that where Greece and Ireland are now are not consequences of popular referendums. They're consequences of the choice of people who either have been elected or have never been elected but had companies and were making economic decisions. My point when I talked about Swiss democracy was to say these people would not be able to make decisions alone because there are others also making decisions. So when we talk about this direct democracy, it's not one only decision-making process. It's a parallel one, it's one in addition, it's one bringing in different opinions.
Very short.
I read that Andrew Jackson, one of the founding fathers, after they made the American Constitution, said that we forgot one very important thing: remove from government the right to borrow. I agreed with him. Remove from government the right to borrow, or have constitutions limiting, at least, the public authority and the governments and the parliaments' right to borrow on their people's behalf, because they have been so irresponsible in most of the countries in the Western democratic Europe.
I'm starting to get quite a few people on the list, so I have to close the speakers list now. The first one to speak is Jan. Remember to be brief.
I'm Mr. Jorn Baltzersen, and I have a comment to the gentleman from Switzerland and Mr. Kinander. Someone once said about Switzerland and all the referenda that a Swiss will call the police before he talks to his neighbor, because the laws are ours. Isn't there a danger that all these referenda will lead to a more tyrannical society? And then I'd like to comment on Mr. Kinander's
very short
comments on that people with pensions will have a tendency to vote for keeping their pensions. Isn't this an argument for less democracy in general? And then I have a suggestion for less democracy. In Switzerland, the federal parliament, I believe, meets about 12 weeks a year. Couldn't we do that with the Norwegian parliament? Send them on more holiday. Thank you.
Florian, what was you?
Well, you see, MPs don't meet enough to become tyrannic, but it is, I'm not saying that the direct democracy doesn't have its failures, and especially the part that is worrying is the part that is new for Switzerland, that the trends of taking rights away via direct democracy. As I said, there's nothing easier than coming in front of people and saying, if your daughter gets raped, this person shall stay in prison forever, or even worse, this person should be executed. Well, direct democracy also can protect itself by a choice of the people that the rights will not be taken away. And that is what we're working on in Switzerland, that we basically have a clause in the constitution that says you cannot vote on fundamental rights. And then you solve the tyranny problem. But the other issue, what we see in Switzerland, is that people know the laws, know how they work, and trust them much more than many other countries, because they're actually the ones also making them. And that is actually quite an interesting point. Is it the tyranny? Does it come from the top, from the ones who are in government and decide by themselves, or does it come from the people themselves, tyrannic against themselves? I don't know. So, but it's true. It's a weird system. We never meet in parliament. They meet 12 weeks indeed per year. Can you imagine a parliament that works 12 weeks per year only?
Morten, you mentioned pensions and so forth. I mean, if I don't remember falsely, Switzerland turned down an extra week off through a referendum. Doesn't it seem like Switzerland is a well-functioning society which use a lot of referendums, much more well-functioning than Greece and other southern European countries that don't have so much referendums?
Sure, and I'm not saying that that it goes wrong every time, and that the people are unable also in referendums to vote against their own immediate interest. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying that it might not solve the issue, and that you might build in a case-by-case decision for something for the running of society which requires an overarching ideology or a system of beliefs that politicians might have to a greater degree than case-by-case issues. And that may be an argument for less democracy, but it may not be it.
I have noticed 4 people standing on the list. First is the gentleman over there. Just before you get the word, and remember to be brief, there's a lady just behind there afterwards. And then I have Mime from Klassekampen, and then the gentleman sitting there. Have I missed somebody? I hope not. And then it's you. And remember to be brief.
Mr. Irminger has an interesting example in Switzerland, the right to have no pollution. And I discussed with the people in the university in Zurich that the problem couldn't happen in Switzerland because the Norwegian system is different. And we discussed that. I said it was the fylkeskommunen, the system here, drive 3,000 diesel buses with 3 persons into the city because they have decided it, the fylkeskommunen around Oslo. And he said, why could that happen? In Switzerland it could not happen. 2 reasons. We will not, in Zurich, we cannot live with diesel buses, it's not possible in Switzerland. And the other, we will not have regional buses into our city. It will not be possible. So, what is your answer? That we have 3,000 regional diesel buses driving through and into the city every day, and it's more diesel pollution here in 1 week than in 1 year in Zurich. As a colleague from the Green University in Oslo, that has more pollution in Oslo in 1
okay,
week
we get the point.
Yeah. The different system, the intelligent system in Zurich, and here
the claim is that we got more diesel pollution here in Oslo than we do in Zurich. There could be a number of reasons. We have some of the arguments here, but Morten, you could start. Florian, what do you believe?
Very briefly, over the last 30 years, what we see clearly in Switzerland is that all referendums that are on ecological issues are won by the environmental organizations. And the Geneva Constitution is the latest example of the greenest, if you want, constitution of Switzerland. But the referendums on environmental issues are regularly won by environmental organizations. That doesn't mean that the Green Party wins referendums. That's a very different issue when the Green Party runs with the referendum. But the worldwide, the WWF, Greenpeace, and so on, regularly win. And one of the biggest wins over the years, over 30 years, regularly in referendum, is the exit of nuclear energy. Geneva banned nuclear energy. Nuclear energy will now be banned in whole over Switzerland. And that is one of the main fights over the last 30 years of environmental organizations, and they win. And so maybe that's an answer to why Zurich is such an example in the use of diesel buses.
Rasmus Hansson, this should be music in your ears, shouldn't it?
It certainly is, and we got something to learn from it. But I just wanted to make a totally different comment. When we are worried about a heavy political system, and when we argue in favor of popular referendums and people's right to decide on stuff outside of the political system, we tend to, it seems, forget that there are other and very big powers out there that need to be kept in check. Namely big companies and big finance. And none of these discussions should forget that those are the forces that are really out of control. And then we keep using Greece and Iceland and whatever as examples. That factor is a very dominating one. And that is a factor that is hard to keep in balance with a two referendum-based system.
The young lady over there, please.
Hi, my name is Christina Puzo. No title, but I'm exceedingly liberal. The question is that it can be argued that with 4-year terms, politicians don't get enough time to be, or they only think in 4-year cycles. They're not long-sighted enough. And it can be argued that if you gave people the vote, it might, create scope for, people thinking in longer terms. But then again, they might also only think of their short-sighted interests, especially when it comes to economic policies. So what I'm asking is really, do you think that people will be more short-sighted, or do you think that people will actually be able to step out of their own immediate interests and their comfort zones and actually help push towards longer-sighted, more coherent policies? And also, just a quick little note, do you think that the direct democracies places more demands on the populace to be educated and informed than what, for example, we have in Norway today?
Florian, I think that question can go to you first.
Maybe 3 points. First, we have one canton in Switzerland, Gladys, doesn't have a parliament. They assemble the people, and people come and vote 4 or 5 times a year on all laws. And it's the canton that has, from the budget point of view, the least deficits of all cantons of Switzerland. They don't have a university either, so it's a small one. But still, there are many small cantons that do way worse. They don't have a parliament. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying, you know. Point number 2, I don't know if people always vote in their own interest. If you look at majorities in Switzerland, 1970, the men decided to give the right to vote to women. Was it their interest or not? I don't know. 1996, if I'm not mistaken, the majority decided to implement the maternity leave. As I said, it's only 3 months and so on. But was it the interest of the majority? Obviously, we're not going to enjoy a maternity leave because the majority is older people and men. To implement a maternity leave, again, I don't know. And the third point that I wanted to make, we have a little bit the feeling that technocrats, the ones who are not elected, technocrats in government or in companies, have the solutions because they study them. But we see in Switzerland on many complicated issues, like now our whole debate on the pension system. Our pension system is crashing. It has been built in 1946 for a system that was very different from today. We don't have money anymore to fund it. The technocrats are unable to find solutions, and the solutions that are being found now actually come from popular initiatives of people assembling from various civil society groups, youth organizations, human rights organizations that think actually we need to save this system with respecting rights. It's interesting that Amnesty International Switzerland looks into the pension system of Switzerland and comes up with solutions, not the technocrats in government, because they're unable to agree, because they defend the status quo very often.
I'm going to let the last 2 people from the floor come forward. First, Mime, a young friend from Klassekampen.
Yeah, my name is Mime. I work in Klassekampen in Venezuela, which I'm sure everyone here sees as the pillar of democracy in the Western world. There is a right, if you gather enough signatures, to dissolve the government and demand a new election. And if you, similar to the right that the government in Denmark has to dissolve the parliament and ask for a new election in certain periods. How do you feel about an idea like that?
Morten, you being the elitist, what do you think?
Well, I think that the possibility of dissolving the government is something that we really should have in Norway. Either through directly to the constitution and the rights of the parliament to dissolve the government, but at least the possibilities of ejecting the government from office, I think, is something that is that we really need in Norway. Whether it's through political referendums or not, I don't know, but I won't exclude it off the bat.
What are your opinions, Kalle Hagen?
Well, I'm in favor of initiatives from people who collect signatures. We already have that locally, not for a referendum, but for this private initiative which the City of Oslo Council has to discuss. So it started, and I believe that the people should have more rights. And when you talk about, let's say, the Swiss system, where you have Parliament sitting together 12 weeks, 3 months, that's the same as we had in 1914. Then Parliament sat 3 months every 3rd year. And I think that now they're talking about increasing the time for our Parliament to sit. Well, I think they should go the other way, because maybe they have to concentrate on the big important issue and not all the details if they weren't there all the time.
We are running out of time, but I'm going to give 20 seconds to Morten and 20 seconds to Florian before we have the last question from the floor.
Just a brief ironic comment. It's interesting that Kalle Hagen wants more rights across the board to all people when he just voted against more rights to the people in the Constitution on socioeconomic matters, which I think he rightly did, but I think he wrongly advocates rights to all people all the time.
well, we are starting to engage in a broader debate, but if you want a short reply on that, Kaliva, of course, will give it.
I'm for the human rights, but the first generation, not the second. I'm very much in favor of human rights, where you say that the government should not intervene and should not stop people from doing things. But I do not believe in the human right to have a good paid job and a nice house.
Florian.
Because somebody has to provide that.
Florian.
Well, I don't think that rights can be divided. The first, second, or third generation of human rights nowadays, I think, fit together. And what we see in democracy in Switzerland is that when it comes to actually voting on social, economic, and cultural rights, well, the people don't think that the state should not act. They actually think that the welfare system is part of human rights and so on. But just taking an example of Venezuela is very surprising for me as a human rights defender. I don't know if in Venezuela you can really go and get signatures if you want your government to step down. That being said, the whole system as it is in Venezuela is a majority-minority system. As I said, direct democracy can also have the effect that you don't have a majority-minority, because it is in the interest of the majority to get the minority in government, because if not, you're going to be defeated. You might be defeated a lot in popular referendums. So you change the system, you change the vision of it, which of course will never happen in Venezuela, at least for the next few months or years.
Last question from the floor. And gentlemen, be very brief.
Yeah, my name is Dag Myhre. I'm a candidate for the Progress Party. It seems to, by Kinander, that you have the position that the people are not sufficiently moral or sufficiently informed to make these decisions. And my question is, why do you think politicians have those qualifications? I mean, lots of politicians maybe are controlled by party tactical considerations or other things. And I just want to make one more statement about human rights. I think it's the same thing about human rights as it is about money. The more you print, the less it's worth.
Okay, Morten, you get 1 minute to answer that question and to summarize.
I agree to the last part, and to the first part I would say that, well, the politicians come from the people and they're part of the people as such, and I don't have either contempt of the people, but I believe that when you're a politician and want to go through with a legislative proposal, you are at some point going to face down the professional lawmakers, and you are going to you have to say at some point how that law fits into a larger scheme of proposals that you are proposing, and it all has to go up in some sense if you are to be taken seriously, and that is something that a case-by-case vote does not imply.
Rasmus Hansson, 1 minute, any closing remarks?
First of all, on the Venezuelan example, I think that we need a mechanism in Norway to be able to dissolve government during a period. There's no doubt in my mind that. Whether a system of getting a certain number of signatures is the one that would work, I don't know. But it points to a very interesting debate that we haven't had here, which is about how to use social media. Because social media could be a vehicle for promoting that kind of discussion and that kind of change. And I think that one of the things that is really needed in terms of developing a Norwegian democracy is to look into what kind of platform social media actually offers in terms of bringing people on board in a way that we've never had the opportunity to do before.
Carl Hagen, any last words?
I'd just like to say that if people knew, it's like Bismarck said, if you knew how sausages and politics were made, you would be very, very scared. I mean, most of the decisions, legislation done in Parliament is done by the bureaucrats in the ministries. It's done by Parliament. And it's not a democratic system within in our Parliament. You remember the biodiesel? One person said, we are going to take that duty-free off. That was the Prime Minister. Large majority in Parliament were against what the Prime Minister did. You remember the case. It's very, very ruled by the top. In each party group and each party, if the 4 or 5 persons with the most important position have decided, that's it. It's not a vote in the parliamentary groups apart from the Progress Party, but even there, there are various things that are decided on the top. It's not at the bottom of each parliamentary group.
Thank you. Lastly, Florian, any last words?
Well, again, I didn't try to sell you the Swiss system, but what I think what we can say from the Swiss system is that it is integrating much more other parts of society to politics, to making law, to public policies than most of the other countries in Europe. And I think the richness of societies like Norway and Switzerland is that we have a vital civil society, we have vital economies, and we need to revitalize a little bit our politics. And what we see in Switzerland is that drafting a new constitution with an assembly elected of non-politicians actually revitalizes fundamentally the way we think and the way we work. The way we work in a constituent assembly has to be in the middle, has to be in the center, has to be over the blocks of the left or the right, whom honestly nobody cares about anymore in the 21st century, and to actually find solutions that are made for more than 4 years, or 5 years, or 25 years.
Thank you so much. I will end this, and before the applaud, før applausen skal jeg bare minne om at neste frokostmøte i Civita, det 13. mars. Da har vi et møte om valgfrihet, hvor vi får alle de borgerlige lederne av programkomiteene til å diskutere valgfrihet, pluss også muligens også Arbeiderpartiet kommer også. Så tusen takk for tålmodigheten, og takk for at dere kom.